Great. So thanks everybody for joining us here today. I'm Edge's AVP for Edge Events and Digital Marketing, Adam Scarzafava, and I'd love to welcome you to today's session from ERP to ecosystem, charting a path to success through higher education strategy, procurement, and technology integration. We're joined by a couple, really well-qualified presenters with a lot of information to share with you today. We're really excited to have Dan Miller, Edge's AVP for Edge Market. Dan also works as a principal in Advantage Solutions and Outcomes Work, their procurement support and advisory groups that Edge works with to make sure we're maximizing that capacity for our members, as well as Edge's Executive Vice President, Christopher Markham. We'll give them both a chance to introduce themselves in a bit more detail in just a moment. But I want to share right at the top here a bit of additional information about Edge, especially for those who may not be quite as familiar with the role that we play, particularly here in the higher education space. So we'll do those introductions. We'll get into today's content right after this. So Edge is a nonprofit research and education network and a technology consortium. We were founded by the New Jersey President's Council for Higher Education, initially to build a network around the state of New Jersey. So we still own and operate that network. It's a high-performing, customized network specific to the needs of the higher education community. That network is also growing throughout the region to serve institutions in Pennsylvania and New York, which is really exciting that we're able to expand that core competency of what Edge does and get more of those institutions throughout the region involved there. We also bring value to our member community in a variety of different ways beyond just the network. We really work closely with institutions to provide them with services that help to close the gaps and meet the challenges that institutions have. And you see some of those areas where, and this may feel familiar to you and the challenges that your institution has: cybersecurity, digital teaching and learning. These are areas where it can be very difficult for institutions of all sizes to identify, hire, maintain, retain the bench of talent that they need to really excel in the cybersecurity space, drive down cyber insurance premiums in the digital teaching and learning side, have the real breadth and depth of instructional design support that their faculty and students need, whether that's in traditional online certificate programs, whatever the case may be. We provide services like these on demand to our members, all at nonprofit rates, with that nonprofit mission and perspective to fill those gaps that institutions have and really help them excel in the use of technology in service to their missions. As a small but mighty, we think, nonprofit, we know we can't be everything to everyone, though. We serve in those areas where we have, really specific expertise. We can bring the network to bear. We can support research. We can support collaboration for our members. But we can't do everything. We're not software developers. We don't build those types of platforms. So with that in mind, we bring value by also being a procurement vehicle. We'll go into a bit today the role that Edge Market plays and the role that procurement plays, and specifically the role it's going to play today in overall strategy and driving overall value to the institutions that we serve. But before we do that, I'd like to, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll invite Dan and Chris to share a bit of an introduction about themselves, and then Dan will get going with the beginning of the bulk of today's content. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and Dan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, great. Well, thanks, Adam, and hello, everybody. I appreciate your good graces at the beginning when I've had a little technical issue. It's just been crazy out here. I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona. Usually it's solid, but today it is not. So hopefully we can get through this. I'm Dan Miller, and I've had the pleasure of working with Edge since 2019. Serving in the capacity of managing and overseeing the Edge Market cooperative pricing system. Just brief background, I've been working in service of the higher ed community since 1987, many years at the solution provider type of a role, sales leadership, and in 1996 began to focus on facilitating stakeholder engagement in the software system selection process and trying to make things effective and easy for the great solution providers that are out there. I get to do more of that with this great team, and it's been great. So looking forward to this session. Thanks, Adam.
Oh, Chris, I think you're muted.
Yep, just caught that. Hi, everybody. I'm Christopher Markham, Executive Vice President here at Edge. I have the privilege of leading this wonderful team. So I have about a little more than 2 decades of direct experience in the field of higher education, as well as the private sector, and about 20 years in the Army Reserves, where I was working in technology-related roles. So I'm looking very much forward. Moving on to the part of the presentation here where we get to talk and deliberate a little bit more about how we actually leverage these tools and these procurement processes to actually impact the ERP to ecosystem. So I'll be digging into a little bit more of the nuts and the bolts and sharing with you based off of some research provided by Gartner, but also some case studies, from my own experience within the SUNY system, where I was principal in leading the team to implement the largest Banner 9 implementation back when Banner 9 was a new system, which was then carried forward as the roll forward prototype to implement for the SUNY Online. Prior to that, the third largest higher ed institution in the state of Florida, I implemented a very large full suite ERP system there. It was actually not so much of a success. So based off of that, those marginal failures, if you will, you'll get some good information of how not to do it and how to do these types of migrations to an ecosystem. So thank you very much, and look forward to meeting with you all.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I will go ahead and jump in. Adam left us off at what I think is really the essence of Edge's mission and ethos. I'm going to clean up my screen here a little bit, bringing value to the Edge member community. And there's a lot of capability within Edge, but we also see the broader picture and do everything we can to make this possible, all these things possible. So my focus, the focus of my portion, really the focus of this session, is the ERP to ecosystem. What does that mean? What is Edge's strategy to fulfill our missional responsibility? And what are some of the things that we've been thinking about that we thought you might be interested in applying in your own worlds, and share some of that with you. So when we look at it from a strategic perspective, our goal is to provide direct and procured solutions and services, those that Edge provides directly, those that we procure on your behalf, to support the planning, selection, implementation, and the optimization over life of administrative, academic, and research support systems. So if we simplify the concept of an ecosystem, it's rendered in that diagram where we have the major applications that we're all very familiar with at the top, ancillary and supporting applications, those many, many applications that stand in the gap between the big ones and deliver great value in conjunction with those larger applications. The planning, selection, implementation, optimization services that are needed to make them come to life, to help you choose the right ones that are correct for your organization and implement them effectively and manage them over time, all built upon strong infrastructure, everything you can think about infrastructure, solutions, and related services. So when we look at it from what we get to do for our members, turns out that the infrastructure, solutions, and services layer, we actually have quite a bit of capability, quite a bit to offer to the members directly from Edge. We're in the business of infrastructure, but also services, but also through the Edge Market Co-op and the solution providers that have all kinds of things that create a capability and value at that layer of the ecosystem. Similarly, we have a great deal of resource to make available and great partners and internal services around planning and all of those other services I mentioned, both through Edge's professional services group, which Chris manages, as well as the Edge Market itself. We recently concluded a very, very successful IT professional services procurement with 15 awarded firms covering all sorts of service vectors and categories in exactly those areas. So that brings us to the point where we are now preparing to do a procurement for all of the systems that you see encircled in that box. We are seeking to build upon to refresh and expand a similar procurement that we did, a bit narrower in scope, more traditional in its composition back in 2018, and things have changed dramatically since then. So we've been thinking about what should we do next that is somewhat future-proof and is meeting the market where it's at today, but helps them see a better way to get to where they need to be. So when we isolate on those areas, we have a certain context that might be unique to us as Edge and challenges that arise as a result of considering that context. And it's how we are going to address the challenges that I think you might find interesting, either because of us or independent of us and in your own world. First of all, just we're a membership organization. We have a wide range and a growing number of member institutions and affiliate institutions, not just in New Jersey, but a growing number around the country. And they range from Rutgers University to Princeton Theological Seminary to private institutions, small and large, to community colleges, et cetera. So it covers the gamut. And when we think about the solution landscape, it's diverse, it's dynamic. There are always new providers coming online, and it's increasingly interconnected. So it's nowhere near as siloed as it used to be, and it's becoming more blurry. The lines are becoming more blurry. So that's a challenge that we have to overcome. So therefore, as we think about our procurement and the strategy that would undergird the procurement, some of the things that we want to achieve, first of all, we think we need to create a relatable framework for the planning and evaluation of solutions and also internal needs that would be relevant to institutions regardless of their stripe or spots, public and private, large or small, 2-year, 4-year plus, and research institutions. So we have to have a resilient, adaptable approach that is relevant. We also want to create and believe that it's an imperative to create an elevated context for meaningful dialogue within institutions and the stakeholders across the enterprise, and also between the institutions and the solution providers. I've supported probably 450 ERP class system selections in my career so far, and a common refrain from the solution providers as well as the institutions is we seem to be dealing at a feature function level, and that's not where we want to live. Many of the people that have gone to work for solution providers worked in higher ed. They understand what's going on, but it's difficult to have that conversation. We want to create a means to facilitate that level of a conversation. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then, of course, a reliable pathway to enable our members and our affiliates to easily purchase the solutions that they determine are the best for them. And so to do all of this, we'll be introducing a business outcomes focus in conjunction with a business capabilities framework to solve those problems, to create the pathways that we feel that we need to create. So let's talk about solutions and capabilities. First of all, solutions enable capabilities. And what do we mean by capabilities? Well, they're the lifeblood of an organization. Simply put, they're the combination of people, process, information, and technology that enables an organization to do the pieces of work that it needs to do. For example, recruiting students, offering packages, admitting, registering, graduating them, hiring, training, scheduling, paying employees, planning, managing, and investing our financial and physical assets, et cetera. Those are capabilities that institutions and really any organization has. The solutions that we go and get are designed to enable those capabilities. They are not capabilities in and of themselves. It's the capabilities, though, that produce the results. The capabilities produce business outcomes. So when we're looking for capability support, we should start to draw a line to, well, what kind of business outcomes are able to be produced? And what makes that really work, when you think about it from a capabilities perspective and managing them, enterprise-wide understanding, planning, and resourcing and managing capabilities is essential to maximizing outcomes while minimizing cost and risk and duplication and all sorts of things that really tend to happen. So we've been looking at it, and there are capability models that help support capability planning. It's been an emergent field of expertise globally. We're seeing some of that activity in the U.S. There are two great models out there that we're aware of, one of which is the Higher Education Reference Model, called the HERM. That's from EDUCAUSE and a coalition of similar institutions around the world. We'll talk a bit more about that. And then there's also a higher educational digital capability framework from a company, Holon IQ. We don't have a relationship with them, but they are worth looking at. So a little bit about the HERM. This is one of those things that we wanted to share with you that exists, and it may be relevant in your world. It's a well-developed set of models that help facilitate planning and investment and actualizing results within an institution. And this little eye chart here is really a reformation of their overall capabilities model for higher ed. It's really the landscape of all of the operational areas in teaching, in learning, research, and core capabilities. So things like curriculum management. That's a framework to describe, well, what goes on in curriculum management. How about student management, all the things that happen there? How about human resource management, all of the things that happen there? So it gives us a language and a structure for institutions to use to do enterprise-wide planning. And so the question that really emerged when we began to look at this is, well, what if EDGE's members and our affiliates could organize, catalog, and manage their business capabilities like they do their curricula? You have great catalogs, course catalogs, and you know what you want to lean into and what you might want to move away from and so forth. What would that look like if we applied it to this principle? And in 2021, EDUCAUSE and the group of organizations announced globally this HERM initiative, this Higher Education Reference Model. And in that presentation, John Martin Lowendahl from Gartner did a great job of providing examples of use cases. If you can organize the capability model of an institution and have it in such a way that no matter who you are or what you're doing in the institution, you could use that model for conversation and planning and measuring and so forth. Here are some use cases. You could highlight through a heat map those areas of operation and really the business of higher ed that are undergoing significant stress or change. So we know what the landscape is that we have to lean into. Maybe a way to layer the pace of change and identifying those things that we are really needing to go fast on, things that we're going to go at a somewhat deliberate speed, other things that we can keep at steady state and have everybody see it, everybody agree to it, everybody align with it, makes things so much easier when you're doing enterprise architecture, enterprise class planning. Being able to make strategic choices and priorities and prioritize those. In this particular chart, the darker orange are the ones that are getting the resources right now because they have the greatest need. They're going to deliver what the institution needs right now, and that'll shift over time, and you see the other layering of the priorities there. A way to assess our current ability to support the applications in those areas from an IT perspective, and maybe other perspectives. Again, a heat map using the same model to identify areas that we're doing well in, but others that we might want to lean into and everybody knows, so let's pitch in to make something happen in that regard. And then a key application landscape view. What are the essential applications that each of the major business areas are relying upon? And are we dealing with some anticipated end of life in some of those things? Things that might be things that put us at risk or that we know we have a need to create initiative around and do stuff. So those are just some examples of how organizations are able to use a capabilities model to organize the conversation and drive the planning. It's available on the web. It will, at the end of the thing, put a link in the chat, but on the EDUCAUSE website, you can go and get it for yourself and download it, take a look at it, and see how you might be able to use that. So that's one of the things that we wanted to share with you. The question also is then, well, what about business outcomes? So if we're dealing with capabilities as a framework, what about the business outcomes and how do we grapple with those? Well, outcomes are really a determinant or the measure of value. And that's really why these investments in new systems are made. If it's all about technology, we're having the wrong conversation. It's about how do we create additional value for the institution. And so let's break down what outcomes means in this world. Business outcomes are the measurable results an organization sees from the strategies they employ and the decisions they make. And the reality is, no matter what you do, you're going to get outcomes. The question is, are you getting the outcomes that you intended to achieve? Are you getting outcomes that you even imagined that you could get? So owning ahead of time the business outcomes you wish to get are essential. So those organizations that focus on business outcomes will seek and invest in the solutions that deliver the greatest measurable results. Because if they know where they want to go and what they need to do, again, it's not a technology conversation, it's a results conversation, then they're going to find the solution partners that deliver those results as evidenced by their client base, and that's where they're going to lean into. And so solution providers with a track record for supporting business outcomes, they represent the greatest value to new and also to existing customers. That's what you want. That's a translation that we want. It's not the speeds and the feeds, it's the results. So our operating thesis is that solution investments should be based on the business outcomes an organization needs to achieve its goals. That's the idea. So what does that look like? Well, one of the benefits is that outcomes help us to elevate the conversation. I told you I've done 450 or so RFPs. Most of them have been 3,000 feature function kinds of things and a checklist, and that's where the conversation sits. Well, we want to go from the what to the why. So an example of a what. Maybe we're asking for APIs to the registration modules of the most common student information systems. Okay, but the why is more interesting because we have a strategic initiative to deliver multi-institutional degree programs and generate substantial amount of revenue, and we're going to do it in the next 2 years. So how do we do that? How does your solution enable that type of an outcome? Similarly, we're looking for automated financial reporting to external stakeholders. Not a bad requirement, but the reason is that we want to reduce costly and time-consuming external audit requests by at least 50%. Now that's an outcome that people can buy into in the C-suite and throughout the organization. The feature doesn't get that much excitement, but what it produces does. The same thing with streamlining the onboarding experience as a final example. Well, the outcome is we want to make life better measurably so when we onboard persons with disabilities. That could be a specific type of an outcome. And the real truth of the matter is features by themselves are simply the components that enable business capabilities. So if someone puts an RFP out there looking for features, absent the definition of capabilities and the outcomes they wish to achieve, then it's your best guess as to whether or not you're going to get to where you really want to get to and make a decision for the right partner who can help you get there. It's the capabilities of an institution that produce the intended business outcomes. And there's a way to connect these dots. And part of it comes through a business outcomes model. So Edge Market, as we formulate this upcoming procurement, we'll be using a business outcomes model and related planning and assessment resources from outcomes work. There is the business model. I'm part of the team. We've created that based upon all of the experience that we have to help drive conversation both internally to organizations, but also with the solution providers. And that's where we really are landing with this procurement, so we could elicit the type of outcomes that these solutions, and they have been doing this, have been able to produce for their clients, and then we can map that to our world and you to yours. So it starts with the concept of business drivers, and those are the internal levers, the levers that can directly impact or influence the organization's strategy, operations, and performance. And I won't go through these, but they're all kind of goal and aspirationally oriented, general in their focus at this level, but then we go deeper in the model. So we're going to have this conversation with the vendors, and we look at underneath each driver, there are investment areas, specific areas that can be invested in by the institution, either with additional resources or with solutions, et cetera, that help to deliver the measurable outcomes for those business drivers. So get to a level of granularity. And examples of the business outcomes are shown there, a little bit of an eye chart, but they are the measurable results that either are expected of or in fact are generated by the investments made in those business driver investment areas. So that's kind of the hierarchy that we're going to be working with as we formulate this upcoming procurement. And the whole goal is to be able to have an intentionally elevated conversation. Some examples that are there is, think about it from an institution perspective. We could ask of any given solution provider, how has your solution enabled others like us to achieve outcomes like these? And those outcomes like these would be the ones that you've thought through and you go, you know what, those are the things that are going to move the needle for us over the next 3, 5, 7 years. The solution providers would be able to have the conversation to say, well, here are some examples of business outcomes in this area that our solution has made possible for XYZ institutions, and they're more than happy to talk about it. Now, here's a really nice one. Be able to go to solution providers and say, you know what, we need to make significant improvements in this area. What are some of your ideas and your experiences that would help us to refine our thinking and be able to leverage the solution that we already own from you or that we're thinking about purchasing from you? And we know many of your people came from these sorts of roles that we currently are living in. So let's have that conversation instead of just a feature function checklist type of a dialogue. So that boils down to the key sections of our upcoming RFP. There's a couple of new ones. We don't see this in too many RFPs. We're going to go full-throated into this. A section on business outcomes and a section on capability mapping. And what does that look like? Well, we will ask the vendors to take a look at the business outcomes map and to indicate their proposed scope of support for the business drivers and the investment areas in that map, in that model. Just declare which ones you lean into and leave alone the ones that you really don't touch in your scope of offering. And we will be asking them to provide some representative business outcomes, really kind of the miniature case studies realized by the select clients that they wish to gather that information from for a number of those things, so we could start to connect solution enabling of capabilities to results. So the capability mapping, though, really gets to a bit more detail. This is where we're going to have the vendors map their proposed solution components to the capabilities that are inherent in a capabilities model with a level of support indicator. Yeah, we do support this area and we are all in on this area, or we provide tangential support in this area, but we have partners that we would direct you to really provide full-throated support for that. And for those areas that they do support, seeking from the vendors some detailed description of how their solution supports those capabilities. So in sum, our goals and aspirations for this, our vision for what happens is that we will create a pathway to procurement that models and inspires these following things. The use of a rational capabilities-based approach to connecting the operational needs of institutions to the myriad solutions that are available to support them. So having a unified model against which to connect to and evaluate the vendor offerings, and then that elevated dialogue that I was speaking of within the institutions and with solution providers that establish business outcomes as their true north. Those are the most important things that we're seeking to achieve. We have to go through detailed conversation to help to understand how to get there, but let's not lose sight of true north. And when all of that is done, our goal is to form a durable foundation for solution selection, implementation, and ongoing value optimization over the life of the solution investment. So that's our vision. That's our goal. We wanted to share with you some of the ideas and approach that we're going to be taking to do that. And I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to delve into the how to achieve these outcomes in True North that Dan was referring to. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So at the outset, I want to qualify the title here. It's not just for CFOs, but the reason why I am listing the Chief Financial Officer here is that the CFO, no matter what role or any of you or any of us are working in, is a capacity that we're going to have to collaborate with on transforming the ERP to an ecosystem. The CFO, according to Gartner research, is the most likely candidate to be the sponsor, the executive sponsor of any kind of ERP to ecosystem migration, whether it's an ERP migration in total, including CRM, business intelligence, if it's just a digital transformation to achieve true data visibility. No matter what the type of ecosystem it is, the most likely candidate industry-wide that will serve as the executive sponsor is going to be the CFO. And so for those reasons, I'm really leveraging this office and this title here. And this is irregardless, as you can see here from the slide, of the size or the scope of the ecosystem implementation or migration. And so what I'm going to share here are some 3 best practices that's not just grounded on anecdotal evidence. It's not just grounded on credible evidence and experience, but also some research provided by Gartner. So let's start with some of the key findings. Let's do a kind of ecosystem social science backwards analysis. Let's start with some key findings. Over the years, Gartner has estimated that about 25 to 35% of ERP to ecosystem projects fail. Now, there's a key reasons for that, but the important thing to note is that this has been trending downward. Most of these implementations are getting better. That makes sense, right? Because as more knowledge, more skill, more ability in these types of implementations become more common, become more pervasive throughout higher education, K-12, private sector, government, that value add starts to achieve a genuine return on investment as evinced through a reduction in total failure or partial failure. And so there are some things that not just the CFO, but institutions can do in order to reduce those risks, right? And 3 of them are listed here in the 3rd bullet down. And so the risks that we should be most concerned with, according to the research, are number 1, suboptimal returns, number 2, cost and schedule overruns, and 3, underestimating the impact of the process change itself. Based off of Gartner's research, we can see that the majority of these migrations from an ERP to an ecosystem, these digital transformation initiatives, right? The majority of them are rated industry-wide as moderately successful or neutral, right? So you can see that the minority of these digital transformations are rated as a failure, but even less than, but more than the failure, but less than the moderately successful and the neutral, right, is the highly successful, right? That still has a lot of room for growth and improvement. So continuing with some of these key findings, right? The risks listed below that I mentioned here that are, according to the research, the top 3 risks that should be of crosshair, critical focus of CFOs and others that are collaborating, right? These need to be actively managed, not just passively. And not just at the strategic level, they need to be managed at the project level as well. We're going to dig into that a little bit here, the difference between the strategic risks and the project risks. So some of the key findings in the suboptimal returns, while a lot of these factors can erode the project returns, so we're talking about project risks here, there are 2, according to the research, that stand out as common pitfalls, right, that are, as I noted here, that are very, largely preventable, right? And the number 1 is lack of management or stakeholder commitment. 2 is insufficient training and communication. From my experience, and I'm speaking from 2011, 2014, and then again in 2017, a lack of management and stakeholder commitment can be a quick death nail, if you will, right? I remember when I was at Georgia Military College in 2011, I was there actually in a civilian capacity, although I was also serving in the Army Reserves on the weekends. But I was there to engage General Peter Boylan at that time, who was the president of the college, in a major digital transformation and a startup of an online campus. So what was needed was an ERP, CRM, as well as an online campus startup. So no easy task for anyone. And because we had full executive and stakeholder commitment from everybody on cabinet, because it was ongoing, right? And because we had that ongoing communication, even when training was not entirely sufficient, we were able to look back after just a short couple of years, and the digital transformation was successful in helping the institution to achieve a net income increase of about 1.6 million that is to the bottom line of the institution. It was funny at the time because the president, had spent 30 years in the military. He was the former commandant of West Point Military Academy. And this was his kind of retirement career. And so having worked almost the entirety of his career in the public sector of the military, he was not used to digital transformation initiatives that generated a net income in the positive in just 2 years or less. He was used to having a 3 to 5 year loss with questionable return on investments, because they were based off of non-P&L metrics, right? And so he looked at me and others, and I just have one question for you all. And we said, what? And he said, is this legal? And so, I say all that as kind of a colloquial way and funny way of communicating the fact that this stuff works, right? It can actually achieve, and it's based off of good, solid research. Number 2 is the cost schedule overruns. The types of overruns that should be avoided and managed with project scrutiny are, number 1, the extensive modifications. I don't think I have to tell too many people these days, back in 2011 through maybe 2017, that had to be communicated with a little bit more finesse. But the extensive modifications, right, will lead to those. One of the other ones that's commonly overlooked, because it isn't always in the same boat as the extensive modifications, is the too many instances, right? The too many instances within these implementations, these migrations to an ecosystem. And then number 3 is weak project management, right? Not everybody is ready to be a project manager. One implementation in 2014, I took a new CIO position at the 3rd largest higher ed institution in Florida. My day 1, I met with the president and the CFO, and they said, oh, by the way, 2 weeks ago, this is, right after I had given them my acceptance of the offer. They said 2 weeks ago, we signed a work order for a PeopleSoft implementation. I said, oh, really? And they said, yeah. And I said, okay, well, tell me more about it. So it turns out it was a $30+ million implementation right off the bat. That turned into a nearly $50 million implementation by the time we were done. There was an individual, I won't name or describe any info and give any data about the individual. There was an individual who was almost on their way out of the institution, let's just say. They were an individual that had not been successful for combinatorial reasons in a variety of roles. They were hoping to give this individual the opportunity to turn that around, and so decided, well, they like to get things done, and they're not always the greatest with people, but they're very focused on the task and on the mission. So we're going to make this person the project manager of this $30+ million implementation. I was kind of baffled that in 2014 that the decisions were still being made like that on implementations, but it happens. And that's a very strong example of weak project management. You can find examples similar to that might not be as strong, but it's certainly still one that Gartner points out in their research and that I've seen in my experience as well. Did I lose my place? Oops. How do I go backwards? Here we go. Oh, I did that. Okay. So again, the key findings, right? Underestimating the business impact of change is the last one here. And so I've listed here 5 questions that even after this webinar, if you want to hit me up, or Michelle or Aaron, to find out what these are and how to actually implement these. These are some questions with regard to risk mitigation and management that should be used to ensure not only business continuity, but organizational change management. You might have heard of that as OCM, but these are some starting questions that are absolutely indispensable. They're not actually that complex, but they are heavy, right? And there is a big difference in these implementations between complexity and heaviness of these. And these 5 will certainly help to ease the load, the weight upon the institution if they are, asked institutionally wide throughout any implementation. So the bottom line, right, even the best laid ERP strategies can go awry, right? And so the recommendations, right, are that CFOs and others should take a leadership role in the strategy decisions and migrating from ERP to ecosystem with governance and quality reviews, ensuring that customizations and modifications have a compelling justification to the institution, and then consider retention. So I know this isn't always easy, especially within public sector higher ed institutions, but 2017, we found a way in a public, highly unionized environment to reward individuals, right? Performance-based incentives along key milestones in this migration from ERP to ecosystem. So we couldn't give out bonuses, we couldn't do that, but we did find performance-based incentives that were almost equally as good. So if you don't have the ability to do that, take it from me. In the last 6 years, going through a highly unionized environment and the largest comprehensive university system in the country, spread across the entire state of New York, 35 campuses across the entire state of New York, to include the city, Long Island, Staten Island, and 7 international locations, we were still able to find a way to leverage performance-based incentives to incentivize the success in achieving key project milestones as we transformed an ERP to an actual ecosystem. And then I'm going to finish out the last few slides here quickly. And so, one of the first best practice is that leaders should identify and categorize risk, right? And that is absolutely indispensable. We have to create, in a sense, a kind of data dictionary of risks, right? And this has to be in collaboration with stakeholders from across the institution. If we're talking about a higher ed institution, the registrar, the financial aid director, the vice president of enrollment management, the BUSAR, or whoever's in charge of business office functions, the student accounts, you name it, whatever your position is, your functional office, you need stakeholder representation to help you build that data dictionary of the types of risks that could occur. Number 2, I'm going to read a little bit more verbatim here. It's just a little bit more meaty. So, if you can, just let's engage this carnivorously here together. In the second, this is absolutely critical to taking that data dictionary of risks, right, and assigning a weight either numerically or qualitatively, right? So reading along here, assign a weight to each of the risk factors you've identified based on the impact to the project, right? This can be either a numeric score, like 1 equals very limited impact, where 10 means causes project failure, right? It needs to be descriptive, or it could be descriptive, such as very limited, or limited, moderate, high, or very high, right? And then in that Likert scale, we need to assign a likelihood, and this also needs to be collaborative across the institution, right? 0.1 might mean very low, where 0.9 means very high, and 1 is certain, right? Or it could just be descriptive. It could be low, medium, or high. And then create the matrix itself, right? If you're using the numeric values, right, create the index. If you're using the descriptive values, create a color-coded matrix, right? Especially when you're engaging with the cabinet or the senior leadership, this color-coded matrix is probably going to be a lot more easily understood. It's going to be a lot more intuitive in the project governance group, which you must have as you transform ERP to ecosystem. This is going to really raise the bar on communication, which is therefore going to inform your training strategy in real time. It's also going to help you to identify and discriminate between strategic risks and project risks and where they might collide. And then lastly and thirdly is the project leaders must review these, right? It's not enough to just have this brilliant, beautiful, appealing project governance group with a great information and knowledge, right? If you don't have that executive support, that first pitfall, right? If you're not communicating on a regular basis and reviewing it with that group as well, with the senior leadership of the institution, not just the project governance group, right? Then you're going to have a failed marriage. You're going to have a marriage that breaks down between strategic risks and project risks, because some of those risks on one or both of those sides, most likely both, are going to turn into issues because of that lack of communication, and that's going to create a problem, right? And so the bottom line here, right? Identify and categorize the risks, identify and discriminate with them. I call it a data dictionary of risks. Assess these risks, the likelihood of them, what the impact is going to be, and then assign accountabilities and responsibilities to the ERP to ecosystem risk management team that include internal assessment and insights from external parties. This is the bibliography to support some of the research findings here. And now I will turn it back over to Adam.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And I think we have a few minutes left for Q&A here. So please, if you have any questions from, for Dan or Chris, inspired by any of the content that they went through today, please share those. We did have one come in privately on the Q&A side. And I think this is one that you probably both can answer a bit. What roles should lead or participate in project governance groups? And Chris, maybe drawing on some of your risk management background and some of the things that you've gone through at institutions. And then maybe Dan, if you can answer with a perspective towards what you've seen with the HERM and groups collaborating there.
Can you repeat that question again?
Yeah, what roles should lead or participate in project governance groups for projects like this?
Okay, so this is not just, me trying to softball the answer to you, but let's start with business science, right? Let's show some deference and respect to the experts in project management and business analysis, right? Well, the International Institute of Business Analysis, the IIBA, right? That is the group that standardizes definitions within project management for ERP to ecosystem implementations. They identify things like functional and technical requirements, financial requirements, procurement requirements, all of the above. They're also the individuals that give us definitions of things like a stakeholder. And so the IIBA defines a stakeholder, and this is based off of research of implementations, as anybody and everybody that can be impact in a project, product, or service, or anybody and everybody that has an interest in a project, product, or service. Why? Well, we've all heard over the years, all this stuff about organizational change management. Again, going back to the pitfall, the risk to implementation, misunderstanding the impact of process and things like that. You want the definition nice and wide, as wide as possible, because you want to be inclusive as possible. Not just because it's a socially minded thing to do, and it is, but because nobody has all the answers as to who is interested in a project, product, or service, or may be impacted by the project, product, or service. That knowledge is asymmetrical from one person to the next. So you must keep that definition of stakeholder as wide as possible. And it's kind of like getting a cluster of data in a scatter plot in statistics. You want to get as much representation from everywhere as possible. I call it ERP to ecosystem diversity, right? You want representation from all groups, and that's going to save you a lot of heartache and heartburn in the long run. And I failed to mention in my presentation at the end, Michelle and Aaron, who are also in these slides, and you'll get information. You can reach out to either one of them if you would love to hear from Dan and I to reach out to assist you free of charge with your strategy here. We're happy to help and assist in some of that right up front.
Yeah, and I'm going to share Michelle and Aaron's email addresses in the chat. They're great resources to get you connected with the rest of the Edge team. Dan, have you seen any best practices or anything sort of emerging out of the HERM model and the way that gets used that can inform some of the ways that these groups come together and really make use of it at an institution?
Sure. So given the breadth of projects that, I've seen or participated in, there's some really good practices for creating the teams that can move the ball forward. And you look at the key major areas of the operation of the institution that are going to be impacted or need to be invested in. And there are ways to identify those people that could speak as agreed subject matter experts. There's a key executive sponsor type of a committee. What the capability model brings to light is a uniform way to have that conversation across the enterprise, and you can organize around that sort of a thing. I'll echo something that Chris said, though. Communication is extremely important, and the means to communicate bidirectionally, both down and out to the broader community, but also to collect input from the key users and others within the organizations. But fundamentally is to have clarity on what are we aligning to do? What is true north? If there's a governance, and there's got to be a way to say yes or say no. So what are the pillars that we're going to pursue and that we are going to use to make our decisions and to drive towards the goalposts and not get directed off into tangents, et cetera.
Yeah, makes sense.
Did Linda get her question posed?
Yeah, I see Linda. Thanks for reminding me there, Dan. I see Linda Santos with a hand raised. I haven't seen a question come through, Linda. If you do have something you want to ask, please put that in the chat as we're talking through the rest of this here, because we want to make sure to get to it. So please drop that in there for sure. We did have another question come in, Dan, around the procurement side of this and how we're using these models for procurement, and around how does an institution, or do institutions participate in these procurements with us, and how would somebody get involved if they want to be a part of the process?
Yeah, we'd love to have people be involved, both to understand kind of where you're at, share more about what we're doing, how we're doing that, if that could be helpful to you. We're going to have results that you'd be able to leverage if that's something that you wanted to do. But we've got means to facilitate input into requirements. If you wanted to participate when the time comes to, witness the vendor demonstrations and maybe participate in some of the evaluative activities. We do have a form that we created to capture that interest. I don't know if you have the link to share, might be able to find that. We'll certainly send that in the follow-up email. And actually, we know that there are some of the great solution providers that are present on the call today, and a way for them to say, hey, we're interested in this procurement. We'd like to know more and how we can prepare for this procurement, because there are going to be some new elements in it as well. So we love to be of service to the community.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Chris, I want to give you a chance too to share before we break. The new models and kind of complicating factors around risk management of launching a new ERP or moving from an ERP thinking to ecosystem thinking. As a nonprofit, Edge does provide a number of services that can be helpful to institutions in this process. Can you share a little bit maybe about sort of the business process transformation that we help institutions do, the strategic thinking and planning that we help institutions do, and some of the ways you've done that with our consortium members? Sure.
I'll use an old military term, BLUF, bottom line up front. Same value or greater for a far lower price. Let's start there, right? Wouldn't it be nice to not be charged $300,000 for an assessment from Deloitte and the Gartners and the bunch, right? And the rest of them? That's what we do. We come in and we provide an assessment for a fraction, pennies on the dollar of the cost, that'll help you with all these key areas. So, I just basically gave, not even an appetizer of what it is that need to be looked out for. We'll provide you with a comprehensive, full 3-year roadmap. We'll do some business process modeling for you, both current state and future state. And, that can, be, lengthened to some degree, depending on the needs and the wants of the institution. But all of that is indispensable. If you're really serious about, transforming from an ERP to an ecosystem, if you're really serious about it, then, you want to bring in Edge to provide that assessment. There's a lot of really good assessments out there, but because of scarcity of knowledge, because of the esoteric nature of these types of things, it's not just technology that's esoteric anymore. A lot of it's the service models, the business models, and all of these types of, digital transformation techniques, right? When you put aside the snake oil, when you put aside all the salesy stuff, and you get right down to it and say, how do I actually do this? Can you show me in an old-fashioned management by objectives, what are the goals? What are the objectives to achieve this? Can you timeline it for me, put into a project plan? Show me where my business processes are breaking down. Show me how my business processes can be improved to achieve goals and objectives, to get visibility. We'll help you do that for a fraction of the cost. So a fraction of the cost. All of our, the only thing we ask is that we can cover our costs. So that's why we're able to do it as a nonprofit, at the rates that we are.
Yeah, it's part of the, that's the enabling, that's the founding mission of EDGE, right? Founded by higher ed presidents to serve the higher ed community. So I think that gets right to the heart of it. That just about brings us to the end of our time here, and I want to respect everybody's schedule for today. We really want to thank you for coming out and for spending the time with us this afternoon or morning if you're a little bit farther out west. But yeah, we really appreciate it. We hope this was valuable information. We'll follow up with the recording and with some useful links and references to some of the research Chris was highlighting, to some of the documentation around the HERM and other models that Dan mentioned. So I think with that brings us to the end of today's content. Chris, Dan, I don't know if you have any parting thoughts for us before we head out.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.